The chamber was cold, not the artificial chill of air conditioning, but the kind of deep, bone-biting cold that came from a place meant to strip away comfort, to remind prisoners that they were alone. Captain Alex Brady sat in the center of it, wrists shackled together with energy bindings that hummed softly against his skin. The force field around him flickered, a subtle reminder that even if he broke free of his restraints, there would be no easy escape. The Galactic Council's warship, Judicator, was a thing of precision. No wasted space, no signs of excess. Alex had been aboard many like it, but never in this position. He sat motionless, his expression unreadable, as the 5 council members observed him from their raised seats. Their silhouettes loomed above, their faces carved from shadow and authority. Varlek, the Zulkarn representative, leaned forward, his reptilian features twisting into something between curiosity and disdain. His black eyes glistened under the pale blue glow of the interrogation lights. "Alex Brady," he intoned, voice thick with his native hissing accent. "You stand accused of war crimes against multiple planetary sovereignties. Your actions have resulted in the deaths of hundreds, no thousands. You have destabilized governments, assassinated high-ranking officials. You have operated outside the laws of the Council, and today you will answer for these crimes." Alex tilted his head, studying the alien with the same detached scrutiny one might give an insect pinned to a board. He said nothing. To Varlek's right, Commander Renzor shifted, his feline-like tail curling in irritation. The Zargathan was impatient, unlike his reptilian counterpart, and it showed. His golden fur bristled slightly as he spoke. "Silence will not protect you, human. We know what you are. We know what you've done. We have evidence. We have witnesses." His sharp teeth flashed in the sterile light. "Did you think you could escape justice forever?" Alex let the words settle. The weight of them meant to intimidate him. He had seen interrogation rooms before. He had been the one sitting on the other side of the table, pushing men and aliens alike toward their breaking points. He recognized every tactic, every manipulation. This was no different. Ravik 4, the synth intelligence representative, flickered its digital eyes toward Alex, its sleek silver frame unervingly still. "Subject exhibits no physiological distress," it reported, its voice smooth but cold. "No elevated heart rate. No increased perspiration. Subject is either highly disciplined or unconcerned with the ramifications of these proceedings." Alex's lips twitched, the ghost of a smirk. "You build a machine just to tell you I'm calm?" His voice was rough, but not weary. Controlled. Renzor bristled. "You mock us even now? You are restrained, human. You are ours." Alex shifted in his seat, his first real movement since they had dragged him in here. His blue eyes, sharp as a predator's, flicked up to the commander's. "Am I?" A pause. It was small, barely perceptible, but it was there. A single beat where the question hung in the air, a subtle doubt worming its way into the silence. Varlek exhaled sharply. "Enough. We do not need his cooperation. We will extract the truth directly." He gestured to the side of the chamber, where a technician moved into place, adjusting the neural scanner. "A deep probe of his memories will tell us what we need to know." Alex's eyes followed the movement. He didn't struggle, didn't resist. But the weight of his gaze was heavy, as if measuring the technician's worth. The young Dracian hesitated, his hand hovering over the controls longer than necessary. "You don't want to do that," Alex said softly. The technician glanced toward his superiors. Renzor scoffed. "Is that a threat?" Alex shook his head, the motion slow, deliberate. "A warning." The machine hummed to life. Tendrils of light laced outward, searching, digging into the unseen pathways of his mind. At first, the screen displayed the usual patterns of memory recall. Flashes of battlefields, faces, starships bursting apart under cannon fire. The council leaned in, watching, expecting to piece together his sins. Then the technician gasped. The images shifted, darkened. The battlefield scenes changed, became something else. The flashes weren't just of war, but of something worse. Something colder, more deliberate. Silent figures moving through the night, shadows slipping through fortified halls. A man, the same man sitting before them now, walking alone through carnage, untouched by it. The memories bled together. Entire units wiped out in seconds. An enemy general who had locked himself inside a safe room, only for the doors to open anyway. A squadron of elite Dracian assassins sent to kill a single human, none of them making it back. The stories were whispered across the galaxy, but few had believed them. No one could be that deadly. No one could be a force of nature, unstoppable, untouchable. Yet here he was. The technician stumbled backward, ripping the device away, as if burned. The readout flickered erratically. This can't be right," he stammered. Varlek's expression darkened. "What did you see?" The technician swallowed hard. "He's not just a soldier. His voice failed him. He turned toward the council. "We arrested the Baba Yaga." Silence. A deep, unnatural silence settled over the room, as if the air itself had thickened. The council members glanced at one another, unspoken dread shifting in their eyes. The name was legend. A ghost story whispered in war rooms, an omen spoken of only in hushed tones. It was said he never left survivors, that when he set his sights on you, it was already over. Renzor stepped back from the table, his tail flicking once, a subconscious response to sudden fear. "Impossible," he muttered. "A myth. A fabrication." Alex met his eyes, unblinking. Varlek's claws tapped against the table, a slow, measured sound. "Is it?" The realization settled in, heavy and suffocating. This wasn't just another prisoner. This wasn't just another human. They hadn't captured a criminal. They had captured something else entirely. Alex leaned forward slightly, the first indication of real movement since this had begun. The force field still hummed around him. The energy shackles still held his wrists. But suddenly, none of that seemed to matter. His voice was calm, almost conversational. "Now you understand." Varlek's mouth parted, but no words came. The door slid open, the security detail moving inside. Blasters trained on the prisoner. The guards had been confident before. That confidence was gone now, their grips a little tighter, their fingers twitching near the triggers. Alex exhaled, his gaze sweeping the room. He wasn't smiling. He didn't need to. Outside the walls of the Judicator, the stars remained as they were, cold, distant, watching. Inside, the council had just learned a terrible truth. They weren't holding a man. They were holding a nightmare. The memory of fear lingered in the chamber long after the words had been spoken. The council members no longer looked at Alex Brady as a prisoner. They looked at him as something else, something they had only whispered about in the darkest corners of war rooms. The name had weight now, more than it ever had before. Baba Yaga. Varlek was the first to recover, though his claws flexed against the surface of the table in a subtle display of unease. He had seen killers before. He had condemned warlords, sentenced mass murderers to execution, wiped out entire insurrections with the stroke of a pen. Yet none of those men had carried the same quiet certainty that this one did. The human remained seated, his posture almost relaxed. He did not protest his bindings. He did not plead his innocence. He simply watched them, letting the knowledge of his name sink into their minds like a venom they had unknowingly ingested. Commander Renzor's fur bristled slightly as he forced himself to speak. "A myth," he muttered under his breath, as if saying it would somehow make it true. Alex tilted his head. "You tell yourself that if it helps." Ravik processed for a moment before speaking, its synthesized voice devoid of inflection. Clarification required. The designation Baba Yaga has been referenced in multiple classified reports across independent sectors. No verifiable identification has ever been made. Human intelligence records claim the entity does not exist. The probability of this designation being a fabrication is 0, the technician whispered. He was still standing at the edge of the room, staring at the failed neural scanner as if it had betrayed him. His face was pale, his voice shaky. "It's him. It's all true." Varlek exhaled sharply, turning his attention back to the prisoner. "You have killed more beings than we can count. Worlds have fallen into chaos because of your actions. You are a destabilizing force, a rogue agent beyond control. You have defied every major power in the galaxy, human and alien alike. How did you come to be this? Alex regarded him for a long moment before answering. Because someone tried to kill me. The council waited, each of them locked in place by the quiet, patient weight of his gaze. 15 years earlier, he had not been a myth. He had been a man, one of many, fighting wars that weren't his to question. The Terran Defense Initiative had trained him well, sculpted him into something efficient, something lethal. But even then, he had been one of many, a cog in a vast machine. Until the mission, until the betrayal. Project Revenant had been designed for one thing: precision elimination. They weren't soldiers in the traditional sense. They were ghosts slipping into enemy strongholds, removing threats before they ever became wars. It was surgical, clinical. Until the day it wasn't. The mission had been classified at the highest levels. A deep strike into Dracian territory. Their objective had been simple: infiltrate, extract intelligence, and neutralize any high-value targets that posed an immediate threat to Terran interests. But the information had been wrong. The strike team had landed in silence, undetected. They had moved through the facility like shadows, clearing rooms with practiced efficiency. But the enemy had been waiting. It had been a trap. Not just any trap, a betrayal. Someone high up in Terran Command had leaked their mission, had sold them out. The directions had been waiting in numbers far beyond what the team could handle. Alex had watched his men go down one by one, picked off in an ambush designed for complete annihilation. His closest friend, Eric Dalton, had been the last to fall, bleeding out in the darkness as Alex fought to drag him to safety. He had failed. By the end of it, he had been the only one left. The Terran Defense Initiative had denied any involvement. They had buried the mission, erased the names, scrubbed the records. The men who had died never existed. The ones responsible for the betrayal had continued on, untouched, protected by bureaucracy and politics. Alex had disappeared after that. He had walked away from the chain of command, from the falsehoods of duty and protocol. He had let the world believe he was dead. And, in a way, he had been. The man had died on that mission. What had walked away from it had been something else entirely. At first, it had been about revenge. He had hunted down the ones responsible, not for glory, not for justice, but because it had been necessary. Because the ones who sold them out had believed they were untouchable. One by one, he had dismantled them. When the last of them had fallen, he had looked at what remained of his life and realized there was nothing left to return to. But the galaxy had no shortage of corruption, no shortage of tyrants who believed themselves immune to consequence. So he had given them consequence. The stories had started soon after. They called him different things in different sectors. A phantom, a force of reckoning, an assassin beyond the reach of nations. But the name that had stuck, the name that had spread the furthest, had come from an old Terran legend. Yaga, the one who came when you thought you were safe. The one who came for you when there was nowhere left to run. Alex's voice was even, unhurried, as he told them this. He did not embellish. He did not justify. He simply spoke the truth. When he finished, the silence in the chamber was heavier than before. The air felt thick, as if each of them were breathing it differently now. Renzor's tail twitched, a nervous tick he likely wasn't even aware of. You hunted them all? The question was quiet, uncertain. Alex nodded once. And after that, Varlek's voice was measured, though there was something deeper there now. Something careful. Alex met his gaze. After that, others came looking for me. Some tried to kill me. Some tried to use me. I dealt with them the same way. Ravik 4's mechanical hum filled the silence. Your actions have shaped entire sectors. Governments have collapsed in your wake. The consequences of your existence are immeasurable. Alex didn't argue. Varlek exhaled slowly. You expect us to believe that all of this was justified? That you were simply a force correcting injustice? Alex's eyes darkened not with anger, but something colder. "I don't care what you believe." The words settled over them like a slow-moving storm. It was Ravik, for who finally broke the silence. "Logical inference suggests that a being with your capabilities would not allow themselves to be captured unless they had a purpose." The words hung in the air, and the council members shifted. Alex could see the realization forming in their eyes. The understanding that they had spent this entire interrogation believing they held power over him. But that was never the case. Varlek straightened. "Why did you let yourself be captured?" Alex leaned back in his chair, the faintest trace of something unreadable flickering behind his expression. "Because," he said simply, "I know what's coming." And for the first time since this interrogation had begun, Varlek felt something he had not expected to feel toward the humans sitting before him. Dread. The silence that followed Alex's words was suffocating. The weight of them pressed against the walls of the interrogation chamber, stretching the space between breaths, between thoughts. The council members had spent the past hour trying to unravel the mystery of the man before them, attempting to categorize him, to understand if he was a threat or a tool. But now a new, unspoken fear seeped into their expressions. They had assumed Alex Brady was the greatest danger in the room. They had been wrong. Varlek's claws tapped against the table with slow, deliberate precision. His reptilian eyes searched Alex's face, looking for deception, but there was none. "You claim to know what's coming," he said carefully. "What exactly does that mean?" Alex exhaled, leaning forward slightly. The force field still flickered around him, a useless barrier against a man who had already decided to be here. "Your council operates under a simple assumption," he said. "You believe that the greatest threats to galactic stability are the ones you already know, the Drexians, the Zargathan warbands, the Terran expansionists. You monitor them, predict their movements, convince yourselves that the balance of power can be maintained with diplomacy and force. But while you've been playing at politics, something else has been growing in the dark. And now it's here." Renzor's fur bristled slightly. His feline ears flicked back, betraying his unease. "You speak in riddles, human. If there is a threat, name it." Alex's gaze swept over them, measuring. They weren't ready. Not yet. The Vazari Dominion. The name hit the chamber like a static charge, sending invisible ripples through the gathered council members. None of them spoke at first. Some glanced at one another, exchanging silent calculations, but no one dismissed it outright. That alone told Alex what he needed to know. Varlek was the first to break the silence. "The Vazari Dominion has been extinct for centuries," he said, though there was a note of hesitation in his voice. "Their empire collapsed before the formation of the Galactic Council. No confirmed sightings of their fleets have been recorded in over 500 years. Alex nodded. "And that's exactly how they wanted it." The technician who had been operating the neural scanner swallowed hard. His hands twitched slightly as he adjusted the interface, pretending to be busy, but Alex could see the fear settling into his features. Someone in this room knew more than they were willing to admit. "They never disappeared," Alex continued. "They withdrew, faded from the records, let you believe they were gone. And while you were busy dividing up the galaxy, they were watching, waiting, rebuilding." Ravik 4's synthetic voice hummed with calculation. "The probability of a galactic-scale civilization remaining undetected for multiple centuries is statistically improbable." Alex tilted his head. "Improbable doesn't mean impossible." Renzor narrowed his eyes. "You claim to have intelligence on them. How?" Alex exhaled, rolling his shoulders as if shaking off a weight. "Because I went looking." The council stiffened slightly. Alex could see the conflict in their expressions, the unspoken question hanging in the air. How could one man have discovered something that an entire galactic government had failed to see? Alex didn't give them time to dwell on it. "I followed the stories," he said. "The disappearances, the ghost colonies, the merchant fleets that never returned, the ones who came back broken." His fingers flexed slightly against the energy restraints. "There are places in the outer rim where entire populations have gone silent. No distress calls. No wreckage. Just gone." Varlek's voice was low. And you believe this is the Vizari? I don't believe, Alex said. I know. The chamber dimmed slightly as the holographic interface flickered to life. The technician hesitated. Then, under Varlek's silent command, transferred the data from the neural scanner. The council screens lit up with fragmented images, satellite footage, intercepted transmissions, scraps of data stitched together with grim efficiency. A derelict Terran warship, its hull torn apart in a way that did not match any known weapon signature. A mining colony, abandoned mid-operation. No bodies. No signs of struggle. Just empty structures and dead comms. A transmission from a Vizari scout ship, garbled and fractured, but one phrase repeating over and over in their guttural tongue. They are coming. The council members were silent. Alex watched as realization took hold, as centuries of comfortable arrogance began to erode beneath the weight of something larger than any of them. The Vizari were never conquerors, Alex continued. They were survivors. They never built an empire. They ran from something worse. And now, whatever they were running from has caught up. Renzor's tail flicked anxiously. If this is true, why bring it to us? Why not warn your own people? Alex met his gaze. Because your people are just as dead as mine if you don't act. Varlek exhaled sharply. You expect us to believe that the Vizari, a civilization thought to be extinct, are not only alive, but preparing to launch an invasion on a galactic scale? Alex's voice was steady. I don't care what you believe. I care what you do next. The weight of his words settled over the room. There was no arrogance in his tone, no bravado. Just cold, calculated certainty. Ravik 4's processors hummed with rapid calculations. If your intelligence is accurate, the time frame for counteraction is likely minimal. What do you propose? Alex let the question hang in the air for a moment, giving them the chance to come to the same conclusion he already had. You let me go, he said. You give me a strike team, resources, and access to your classified intel. I don't need an army. I just need the right people in the right places. Renzor's eyes narrowed. And why should we trust you? Alex smiled, but there was no humor in it. Only the edge of something sharper. You don't have a choice. The chamber fell into another tense silence, but this one was different. Before, the council had been questioning a prisoner, believing themselves in control. Now, they were beginning to understand. Alex hadn't been captured. He had walked into their hands because it was the fastest way to get what he needed. Varlek studied him for a long time before speaking. And if we refuse? Alex leaned forward slightly, his voice quiet but carrying the full weight of certainty. Then you'll all be dead before you realize how wrong you were. The council exchanged glances, the enormity of their decision pressing down on them. Alex could see the cracks forming in their resolve, the realization that their galaxy was no longer as secure as they had believed. It was only a matter of time now. Alex sat back in his chair, waiting. They would come to the right conclusion. Because if they didn't, nothing else would matter. The assault began in silence. Alex Brady crouched behind the jagged outcropping of a broken bulkhead, watching the movement of Vizari sentries through his helmet's augmented display. The air inside the enemy warship was thick with the faint, acrid tang of ionized metal, the residue of countless battles fought in the void. Shadows flickered under the pulsing red emergency lights, casting jagged silhouettes of the biomechanical architecture that coiled through the vessel's spine like veins in some ancient, slumbering beast. They were deep in Vizari territory now, well beyond the point of no return. The strike team had infiltrated the flagship Codex Prime, a vessel so massive it dwarfed anything the Galactic Council had ever fielded. This was the beating heart of the Vizari Dominion's resurgence, the command hub from which the coming war would be orchestrated. If they could destroy it, they could cut the invasion off at its head. But there was no margin for error. Alex adjusted the grip on his rifle, glancing to his left where Darius Cole, a former Terran Black Ops specialist, steadied his breathing. His cybernetic eye flickered in the low light, tracking the sentries' movements as they swept through the corridor below. To his right, Renzor, now reluctantly his ally, flexed his claws against the hilt of a curved energy blade. the Zargathan warriors' usual arrogance buried beneath the cold calculation of survival. They weren't friends. They weren't even allies in the traditional sense. But they all understood one thing: failure was not an option. Alex's voice came through their encrypted comms, low and steady. "We move in 30 seconds. Stay tight. No unnecessary engagements." Cole gave a grim nod. "They won't even see us." Renzor exhaled sharply. "I hope you're right, human." Alex didn't answer. He knew better than to rely on hope. The team moved like ghosts, slipping through the dimly lit corridors, bypassing patrols with a kind of precision that only came from a lifetime of operating in the shadows. Alex's mind worked several steps ahead, mapping routes, predicting enemy patterns, adjusting for deviations. Every footstep was measured, every movement a calculation in survival. They reached the control chamber's perimeter, a towering set of reinforced blast doors that pulsed with an eerie, greenish glow. Beyond them, Vazari warlords orchestrated the final movements of their invasion fleet, oblivious to the predators circling outside their den. Alex motioned to Cole, who slid a small device onto the security panel. A flickering stream of data scrolled across his HUD as the infiltrator worked his magic, bypassing layers of encryption designed to keep entire armies at bay. Seconds stretched into eternity. Cole exhaled sharply. "I'm in." The doors hissed open. The team moved. Alex was the first through the threshold, his rifle spitting precise bursts of energy into the nearest Vazari officers before they could react. Renzor followed a heartbeat later, his blade flashing as he carved through the staggered warriors who lunged toward the alarm controls. Cole worked from a distance, his pistol delivering silent, pinpoint shots as he secured their flank. The chamber erupted into chaos. Vazari commanders bellowed in their guttural tongue, scrambling for weapons for cover, for any response to an attack that had already undone them before it began. Alex's mind registered the shifting battlefield in fragments. One enemy reaching for a plasma rifle, cut down before he could fire. Another slamming a fist against a security panel, only for Cole's disruptor round to obliterate the console before the alarm could trigger. But then the tide shifted. Heavy footfalls thundered from the far end of the chamber as a reinforced door split open, revealing a figure wreathed in dark armor, taller and broader than any Vazari Alex had faced before. Warlord Korzek. The Vazari warlord's obsidian carapace gleamed under the emergency lighting, his yellow eyes locking onto Alex with something dangerously close to amusement. A massive war axe, its edge crackling with raw plasma, rested across his shoulder as he stepped forward, unconcerned with the bodies of his fallen kin strewn around him. Alex barely had a second to react before Korzek moved. The warlord was faster than something of his size had any right to be. One moment he was standing across the chamber, the next he was upon them, his axe cleaving through the air with terrifying force. Alex barely twisted out of the way, the blade carving a molten scar into the floor where he had stood a second before. Cole fired twice, the energy round striking Korzek's armor with a dull thud before dissipating uselessly. The warlord barely acknowledged the attack, his gaze locked onto Alex, as if nothing else in the room mattered. Alex didn't hesitate. He rolled forward, bringing his rifle up, firing 2 precise shots toward the warlord's exposed throat. Korzek caught the second round with his hand. Alex's mind registered the impossibility of it, the sheer absurdity of the act. But there was no time to dwell on it. The warlord moved again, his axe carving through the air in a sweeping arc. Alex twisted away, but the heat of the weapon's edge grazed his armor, sending searing pain lancing through his side. He hit the ground hard. Renzor lunged from behind, his energy blade slashing toward the warlord's spine. Korzek twisted, catching the Zargathan's wrist mid-strike. With a brutal efficiency, he slammed Renzor into the wall, the force enough to crack the reinforced metal. Alex forced himself to his feet, shaking off the pain. His vision blurred for half a second before snapping back into focus. He couldn't win this fight in a direct contest of strength, but he didn't need to. His gaze flickered toward the central command console, where the invasion fleet's tactical data pulsed in alien script. That was the real objective. "Korzek," Alex called out, his voice sharp, measured. The warlord turned, tilting his head slightly in curiosity. Alex smirked. "You should have killed me when you had the chance." Then he threw the grenade. The explosion was controlled but devastating. The blast consumed the central console in a shower of fire and shattered data streams, sending shockwaves through the entire chamber. The tactical controls for the invasion fleet were gone. Korzek roared, his fury shaking the walls. Alex turned, sprinting for the exit. "Move." Cole was already up, dragging a dazed Renzor to his feet as the team bolted for the evac point. Behind them, alarm screamed, the ship's structure groaning under the sudden cascade of cascading failures. Alex didn't look back. They reached the extraction point just as the charges they had planted along the ship's core detonated, sending fire and debris cascading through the corridors. The flagship was dying, its systems failing, its crew scrambling in vain to salvage something from the wreckage. The team launched from the docking bay just as the Cordex Prime began to collapse inward. Through the viewport, Alex watched as the warlord's flagship, the heart of the Vizari invasion, was consumed by fire. The war wasn't over. Not yet. But tonight, they had crippled it. Alex leaned back, exhaling slowly. His ribs ached, his vision swam at the edges, but the mission was done. Renzor let out a wheezing chuckle. "You humans are insane." Alex smirked, watching as the wreckage of the Vizari warship burned behind them. "Yeah," he said, "but we get the job done."